Hey, yeah, hey. Okay,
Good.
I'm going to be all mixed up now. This is not morning. Okay. If one cut the oven into segments and placed sand between the segments with Elias Ruza Tahor, but the Kakum and Rula Tame. This is the oven of the coiled serpent. Arabian cauldrons that one digs in the ground and plasters with clay. If the clay can stand on its own, it's Tame. If not, it's Tahor. And this is the oven of Bendina. The oven of stone or of metal is tahor, but the metal oven is tame as a metal utensil. If it developed a hole, it became damaged or cracked, and one made a clay clothing for it or a supplement of clay, it is tame. How large must the hole be? Large enough for the flame to pass through. And the same applies to a stove. The stove of stone or of metal is tahor, but the metal stove is tame as a metal utensil. If it developed a hole, it became damaged or cracked, and one made feet for it, it is tame. If one plastered it with clay, whether on the inside or on the outside, it is tahor. And Reb Yehuda says on the inside it is tame, but on the outside it is tahor. Okay. Um, if one assembled 3 feet upon the ground and joined them with clay so that he could set the pot on top of them, this makeshift stove is tame. If one affixed 3 nails into the ground so that he could set the pot on top of them, even though he fashioned a place on the top of this makeshift stove for the pot to rest, it was tahor. If one made 2 stones into a stove and joined them with clay, it's tameh. But if Yehuda rules it tahor until he makes a third stone or until he places the stone near the wall. Okay.
Okay. So
One
now,
stone,
so
one
now,
more. If one stone was joined with clay and one was not joined with clay, it's tahor. Okay.
okay. So what we're saying over here is that we're talking about stones which are normally impervious to tumah,
Mhm.
and what makes them susceptible not to tumah is the fact that they get fixed in place with clay. So this clay
Okay.
that's fixing them in place, that's kind of taking that's what's turning it almost into an earthenware vessel that makes it susceptible to tumah, and it's now fixed in the ground. Um, so here's another combination that the Mishnah starts playing with. So you see in the diagram, the pot is set upon the stone and upon the oven. So the stone, of course, is fixed to the ground. It has to be fixed to the ground because if it's not, then for sure the whole thing is not susceptible. Okay. Whether it's on a stove or whether it's on a or a kupach, this is tame. It's no better than having 2 stones, right? So it basically comes down to the same thing. If one put a pot upon a stone and upon a second stone, or on it and on the bedrock, aleha al kosel, or on a wall. This is tahor. This is not considered a proper kli because at least one of the two supports for the stove is not fixed into place with clay. So even though bedrock is fixed in place, but bedrock is connected to the ground. It's not fixed in place with clay. It's just natural in the ground. This is not susceptible to tumah. So they used to do this for the Nazirim who wanted to make their korban and ensure that there was no chance of anything becoming tameh. The Nazirim, they did this actually in the southeast corner of the women's courtyard. That was remember that we learned in Midos that southeast chamber is called the chamber of the Nazirim, and that is where they used to cook the Zra B'Sheila. And just to ensure that there was no possibility of any tumah happening on this oven, they built it like this into the bedrock. Here's a tabachim, so the butcher's stove. Okay. So what is the butcher stove? Let's just see here. This is butchers sold cooked meats to the public, would set up a number of stones in a row, as you see in the diagram here. Okay, which we used to support many pots at once, and each pot rested on the top of 2 stones. Okay, so here we've got 4 stones all set in place, and this is where things start getting interesting. It's a bit like a game of sort of 3-card Monty, where you take away this one, put it back, whatever. So and we're going to carry on more with these in the following Mishnahs. When he puts one stone on the side of another stone, okay, okay, if one, what this diagram that we're looking over here, just to explain it outside, you've got these 4 stones in the diagram over here, which make effectively 3 stoves.
Right.
The thing is that the stone itself is not what becomes tamei, it's the stove that becomes tamei, which means a combination of 2 stones makes a stove. Okay, so if the one on the left, if that gap on the left becomes tamei, then the other 2 on the right do not become tamei, even though the one in the middle shares a stone with the one on the left. Okay, so we see that. So we're seeing over here is that we're looking specifically at the space that is in between the stones, and we're calling that the stove. And whatever part of the stone is actually necessary for that stove. And we're going to see some interesting subtleties as we go through these mishnahs. Okay, shalosh avanim she'asan shtei kirayim. You have 2. If you have 3 stones that you'd made into 2 stoves. Okay, so it's basically this diagram, but take away one of the stones. Okay, nitmeis achas min achitzona. So if the outside, well, okay, let's if a sheretz came into contact with the airspace of let's say the left hand one,
Right.
So that middle stone, the one that serves both the left and the right pieces of the stove, the left half is tamei and the right half is tahor. Okay, so if for example food came into contact with that stone, it depends where it came into contact, because the tumah only penetrates halfway across that stone. Nitla hatahora. Now, let's take away the tahor stone that's on the right hand side. So now all that you've got left is two stones together, and now this is just one stove that is entirely tamei. So this one middle stone that was originally split in half and was half tamei, half tahor, you remove the tahor one on the other side, there's no more stove anymore there, and now the entire stone becomes tamei, even the part on the outside which was previously we said was tahor because it was serving a tahor stove. Okay, nitla hatamea. What happens if we were back in that original state where you had the 3 stones, instead of removing the tahor stone, you remove the tamei stone on the left hand side, then the entire middle one becomes tahor. It's a fascinating little bit of magic that's going on over here, because it's not the stones. You got it. I think that's the most helpful way I'm finding of visualizing what's happening with the tumah, is that don't think of it as the stones becoming tamei. Think of it as the stove becoming tamei, and the stove is the gap between the stones. So what happens if you removed the outer? If you removed when you have the situation of the 2 stoves, well, one being tamei, one being tahor. Okay, so then you got to divide the line in between. But if you take away the tahor one, then all you've got left is a tamei stove. And if you take away the outside the tamei stone, then you've broken down. That's how you purify earthenware from tumah, is by breaking it. So you've broken down this tamei stove, and that inner stone is tahor completely.
It looks like the stones down the outside there are like sitting on a tray or something. My eyes are,
because they're not sitting on a tray. That line that you see around there is the clay that's baked them that's stabilizing them on the ground.
Okay, all right.
Right. Without that, they would just be rocks on the ground that wouldn't be considered a stove, and they would completely be impervious to tumah.
Okay.
It's only the fact that they're fixed to the ground with that clay is why we're even talking about the subject. Okay. Okay, so if the 2 outer stones, and again, I don't find it helpful to think of the outer stones as being tamei, but both of these stoves have become tamei. Okay, you've got the two gaps over there, and both of them have become tamei. Now look at the middle stone. So now, let's say if you have a very thick stone in the middle, and the measure we're going to learn a little later is 3 finger breadths. That's how much you need to rest the stove on. So now, if the stone is up to 6 finger breadths, then the entire middle stone is going to be tamei, because you need all that space for resting the pots. But let's say it's a big fat thing, and and you've got and it's like 10, let's say it's 10 finger breadths wide. So the tumah only penetrates the stone 3 finger breadths from the edges, and the middle 4 is tahor, because all that is a piece of stone. It's not part of the stove, because you don't need anything beyond the 3 finger breadths, and that makes it into so all that you've got is you've got your 2 tameh stoves on the outside, a piece of stone that's impervious to tumah in the middle over there. Okay. But if it's narrower than 6 finger breadths, then it's all tameh. Now, nitla, and just remember that case, because we're going to find an interesting contrast now. Nitla ha'emtzais, what happens if you took away the middle stone? Im yachol lishpos aleha yora gedola. If you could rest a big cauldron on these two on the 2 outer stones, then it still remains tameh. There's still tumah over there, because you haven't effectively broken down the stove. You've just converted it into one big stove, which is still tameh. Okay, so the whole thing that supports a pot, it remains tameh. Hechzira, if you put back the middle piece now and cement it into place, everything becomes tahor again. Why? Because you broke down the original stove that was tameh, and you also broke the large stove that was able to support a cauldron, and you've created 2 new stoves. So now
there would only be one pot on there. There'd be only one pot then. We put this big cauldron down. It's one pot.
It's only one pot. So now you've got 2 ones. You can't put the cauldron down on top of the whole thing again, because now you've got 2 separate spaces, and it's not going to the bottom can't rest in that gap. Meracha betit. If the stone was plastered with clay, okay, so it is susceptible to tumah from the time that it's been baked enough to cook an egg. That's our minimum shear, remember, for an oven, and that's when it becomes a finished kli. Hey, now, remembering the case that we just had, let's go into the next one, which is an interesting contrast. Shtei avanim. Okay, you got 2 stones, she'asam kira. You made them into a stove, v'nitma'u, and it became tameh. Okay, we've seen this case before. Now, samach lazor even achas mikan v'lazor even achas mikan. Okay, so on the outsides of these 2 of these 2 stones, we put 2 more stones, so that we've got that butcher's stove that we saw in the diagram on page 298. Right, so the gap in the middle, that one, the stove in the middle is tameh, but the 2 on the outside are tahor. Okay, so now what's happened is that so once again, the half of the 2 middle stones that's on the inside, that's tameh, and the half that's facing the outside to the tahor stoves suddenly becomes tahor. Okay, nitlu tahoros. If the tahor stones were removed, then chazru elu letumasan. Then once again, the whole stove, the stones, the entire stone becomes tameh. Now, the interesting contrast that we wanted to bring over here is the fact that when we had the 2 stoves that were next to each other that were tameh, we said that we needed 3 finger breadths on either side, but that was because of that middle, when it was a middle piece, we said only 3 finger breadths on either side. So if you had something that's 10 finger breadths, then there's a 4 finger breadth gap in the middle of the stone that remains tahor. But we don't say anything of that when you've just got 2 stones. Why don't we ever say that only the inner 3 finger breadths become tameh, not the rest of the stone? And that's one of the things that we're saying all over the place here, is that if you just got 2 stones stam cemented, we don't make any reference to how big they are or how small they are. The whole thing becomes tameh. So the explanation that I saw in here in the art scroll is what is the difference is that when you had the 2 stones side by side, it's not practical to use this is something where you need to use two pots side by side. So any encroachment from one onto the other is going to reduce the functionality of the other side. So we only judge the inner stone according to the three finger breadths that it actually needs. Whereas when you have two stones just close to each other, you can put any size pot on top of that, and it won't. And the stove is serving its function properly. So that's why we don't care about how wide it is. To say, okay, the wider the better. It's just you can support a bigger pot on top of the stove. It's only when you've got two next to each other that the two stoves are actually effectively in competition with each other. So you can't put like as big a pot as you really want onto those stoves. Okay,
All right.
that's it. Let's go Chazara.
I'm not going to say that was simple as well.
No. Keilim is nowhere near simple.
All right. Gimel Aleph. The measure of a hole that will render an earthenware utensil hot, or is as follows. That which was intended for food is with olives. That which was intended for liquids is with liquids. That which was intended for both food and liquids was applied to it, the more stringent measure of olives. A barrel, its measure for tumah is with dried figs. These are the words of Reb Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda says the meah is with walnuts. Meir says its measure is with olives, and the stew pot and a cooking pot, their measures are with olives. A flask and a tiffy, their measures are with oil, and a tartar's measure is with water. Reb Shimon says the measure of all three are with seeds, and a lamp, its measure is with oil. Reb Eliezer says the measure is with a small pruta. A lamp whose mouth has been removed is tahor, and a lamp of unbaked clay whose mouth has been fired by the wick is tahor. A barrel that has developed a hole and one repaired it with pitch and is broke, if the place of the pitch can be contained a quarter log, it is tameh, since the barrel never lost its designation as utensil. An earthenware fragment was developed a hole and one repaired it with pitch, even though it contained a quarter log, it is tahor, since it has lost its designation as a utensil.
Okay.
A barrel.
That's it. That's it.
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. That's it.
Just give me a second. I hear my grandson crying. I just want to make sure that somebody is paying attention to him.